Welcome to everybody. This is author Kayleen Reusser, and she's going to talk about interviewing military veterans, which we all should be doing. And one of my biggest life regrets is not interviewing my grandfathers before they passed away. So I highly suggest interviewing any military veterans you know, because their stories are important. So we're going to hear more about that now. Take it away, Kayleen.
Thank you, Allison. I just wanted to say thank you to the whole department, Mr. Witcher, and everyone for allowing me to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share something that has become quite a passion for me. And in a similar vein to what Allison was saying, I began interviewing veterans about 10 years ago, but I wish I would have started 20 years ago. And all I can say is that better late than never. And I am positive that Allison's grandfathers would have been very proud of her here today, helping people learn about this and in this method and helping people every day with what she does with genealogy. So, I can't be everywhere at once. I just can't interview every veteran. So I am very happy to give any hints, tips, encouragement for people to try to do this. It's a challenge. I will not say it's necessarily a beginner's project, but it's definitely something that can be aided by some of the tips I'm going to give you here today. All right, well, let me just start here with the screen we have in front of us. I have a couple of friends. That's the one huge plus that's been part of my project of interviewing veterans is making friends with them. The one in the upper left corner is Gene Detmer. He is an Army veteran who served at D-Day on Utah Beach. He is featured in my book there. And then down in the lower right corner is Lucille Clark, who was in the Navy, and they were called Waves. Now, Lucille and I are special friends because we went on the honor flight together, honor flight of Northeast Indiana. I always try to give that group a particular plug because I believe that they inspired me to start looking at the potential of stories that were around me. 10 years ago, I had never considered interviewing veterans. I did work for a newspaper where I did a weekly column, and I was encouraged to interview a World War II veteran through that. I knew nothing about the war, and I thought, oh boy, that's going to be a lot of work to put it together afterwards. But I interviewed a man who had been a Marine in the Pacific, and he talked about invading the islands of Tinian, Tarawa, Peleliu, and he had 2 Purple Hearts. When I came out for being injured, and when I came out of that interview, I felt like I had been sitting in front of a living piece of history. And I've never considered myself a historian, but what I like to do is talk to people because I believe every single person in the world has a great story inside of them. They may not know that, and it's been a privilege for me to bring some of those stories out. But especially with our military veterans, I believe that they have stories that are part of our national heritage that need to be shared. And I should also mention that I am the proud wife and mother of Air Force airmen. So my husband retired from the 122nd Fighter Wing in Fort Wayne, and our son is an officer. And so I have a lot invested in our military, and for me, this is one way that I can show my support for them. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so your goals for conducting the interview. My first goal from start to finish is to always show respect to the veteran. And I'm going to show you some of the ways that you can do that. By the end of the interview, he or she should feel very glad that they consented to do the interview with you. Now, by the way, the words he or she, I have female veterans in all of my books except the D-Day book, but the overwhelming majority of veterans that I have interviewed have been male. So just for ease here today, I'm just going to use male pronouns when I'm talking about veterans, but I definitely believe in the female veteran stories as well. Then the second goal at the end of the interview is you want to make sure that you do have a complete story, or at least enough details to put together a story. You don't want to get home and or off the computer if you've done it by computer and think, oh, I wish I would have asked that. There's going to be some of those inevitably. But the list of questions that I have provided for you might look a little intimidating because there's quite a few questions, but that is a guide. It is for you to use, and depending on everything about the veteran, a male, female, their age, the conflict they were involved with, you may want to skip a question or add something that you've just thought of on your own. But that's just a guide for you, but it is a complete guide. Find a veteran to interview. Now, some of you who have tuned in today may have a veteran in mind already, and maybe you've already set up that interview time with them, and that's great. But for some of you, it may be just a thing you're thinking about, and you could really use some ideas on how to find a good veteran to interview. Ask your friends and relatives for names. This is a good idea because they might have somebody who's already shared stories with them. And so your friend would know, oh, this guy can really tell a good story. And he can still remember a lot. And that is one question that I always ask when someone asks me to interview someone else. I will say, are they willing and able? For instance, a child might want me to interview her dad, but I don't know for sure that the veteran wants to be interviewed. So those are always questions to ask. And then the ability to be interviewed. I've been working with some of our nation's oldest veterans for the past 10 years. And that means I started when World War II veterans were in their late 80s. And now they are definitely mid to late 90s. And in fact, I know several veterans who are 100 years old. So that's definitely a factor because their stamina is going to be pretty reduced and their memories. I mean, if I'm asking them to remember World War II, that's more than 75 years ago, which is quite amazing that they could even remember anything in my book. In fact, last week, May 8th, 1945, was the 75th anniversary of the end of the war. So those memories would be more than 75 years. So, you just have to look for someone who can pull up some details. And Korean War veterans are a good choice. If you can find some Korean War veterans, they would be in their 80s. Here's some reasons why they would be a good choice. For the most part, they served in the same country, in Korea. So you would be just dealing with the one continent. I never knew for sure where a veteran would take me, literally, when he was telling me his story. Could be Europe, it could be Asia, it could be the Aleutians, Cuba, it just could be anywhere. So think about that. And for the most part, they're very eager to talk and able to talk. When they're in their 80s, they're going to be pretty able to remember yet. And then they consider that to be the forgotten war, 1950 to 1953. It was just a few years after World War II ended. And in fact, some of the vets I've interviewed were recalled for the Korean War. But they want to get the word out. There's just a lot of them that are pretty eager to talk about that. Be aware of legal limitations. And I'm talking about privacy laws, the HIPAA laws. This can be a challenge, especially for veterans who live in a retirement community or a nursing home. And of course, that's almost completely out of the picture right now, but I have been in a lot of nursing homes to do interviews, and it can be where you just have to work with them, cooperate as much as you can. Don't be a challenge to the people who work there. But if I would go into a nursing home, especially if they do not know me, and I would just go up to the front desk and say, do you happen to have any World War II veterans here that I could interview? They're not going to be able to tell me anything. There's just a lot of privacy that goes into the people's lives who live there. So what I would have to do then is maybe leave a card and hope that the activity director would get back with me and work with me. It's a lot to put on them. I really wouldn't encourage that right now because nursing homes are under so much duress. So look for somebody who's possibly living at home yet. And refrain from pressure. If a veteran tells you no, that he does not want to be interviewed, that's okay. Just go on. Tell him thank you for his service and just let it go. If a veteran seems to be a little on the fence, wavering, I might say, well, the reason I asked you is because I have worked in a school library and I feel like our current generation of students really needs to hear your story to understand what life was like back then. But again, if they still say no, that's it. And I have been told no. So, you can just go with that. I regret that they didn't want to share their story, but there was probably just some difficulties associated with the war they just don't want to get into. And that's the end. Setting up the interview. This can be tricky, depending again on the age of the veteran. And of course, like I said, I've worked with the really old ones. So I usually look for help. And that can be in the form of people who know them well, neighbors, their children, nursing home staff. Older veterans usually have trouble hearing on the phone. And this is especially true when they would have been in a conflict, standing next to a gun that was going off constantly. It can really damage their eardrums on ships and on land. So look for help if you can find it from a neighbor, someone who checks in with them, or even someone who has recommended that you interview them. See if they can get this established with the veteran. Morning or afternoon, I don't even go evenings because usually they're tired. That's not a good time. But morning or afternoon has worked. Some veterans have gotten up early all of their lives. So they like morning. 10 o'clock is a good time. I try to schedule it in between meal times. There are some vets at this point, though, who are not good or even awake until maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So just try to schedule it so you won't be running into their mealtime due to their medications and so on. Maybe being diabetic, they may have to eat at a very specific time. So you want to stay away from that. When you're setting up the interview, ask them then if they have any photos of themselves in uniform. And the reason I'm saying ask them then is because they may need to look for them. They may need to ask their kids if they have them. If they have moved a few times to various nursing homes, some of that may have been given to their children to take care of. So they may need to get those back from them or ask for other mementos. But be prepared if they haven't kept anything. I've had a couple of veterans who, when they came home from the war, they were completely wanting to put everything behind them, not think about it anymore. They didn't bring home anything. And one guy, all he had was just one picture of him in uniform. And then call the day prior to confirm that the vet is still able to meet. They may have forgotten about it, or they may have gotten sick. It can all happen, and it has happened to me. That's why I recommend us staying in touch with them. Now, I just wanted to show you a couple of things that one of the vets shared with me when I was asking him if he had any mementos. Now, of course, this is not a picture of him in uniform, but it was a picture of Al Lefevre. He was a sailor in the Pacific, and those guys were on their ships for months at a time, and they were needing things to be entertained by. So in one port, Al purchased this beautiful grass skirt here and his little top. and he did a little performance for them. But what I found interesting too was that he was allowed to have facial hair. I had not known that sailors were allowed to grow beards. So that was interesting. And then the dollar bill there along the left side, George's right side, his right ear, there's the word Hawaii. Now, this was stamped, I believe, after the war ended. I think it was part of the occupation money to get the economy stimulated again. But you just don't ever know for sure what you're going to find when you ask for these things. So everything is interesting. Successful interview. You don't want to go empty-handed. You do not want to try to have your memory pull up details later. You will not be able to do that. I'm fairly old school. I take all kinds of things to back up because I don't believe, and I've had things happen where I've even forgotten to load a camera with batteries and just all kinds of stupid things. So here's your little reminders. I take a stenographer's notepad for notes. I've been trained for 30 years as a reporter to be able to keep up with people as they speak. I have created a lot of abbreviations for words. BT is basic training because every story I've ever interviewed a vet, we talk about basic training. So I do that. You can purchase one of these at Dollar General for just about $1. Another thing I take then is a digital recorder. These are very small, so really handy to take, or you could record it with your phone. I also take a camera, and this is probably overkill, but like I said, I'd rather have too many options to record and get photos and things rather than not enough. And of course, make sure your phone is charged, but turned off during the interview. You don't want that to be a distraction. Take batteries along. And then if you are taking notes, take 2 or 3 pens. I also used to use something called a handheld scanner. Now, this was back before I had an iPhone. It was it was the most marvelous thing. I probably have scanned thousands of pictures with it. And it was, I think my husband got it at walmart.com, and it was probably about $50 at the time. I haven't priced them lately, but I'm sure you could still find one. The thing is, I have found that my phone today, my iPhone, takes a higher resolution photo than even my scanner does. So again, I might stick it in my bag with new batteries, but I'm not going to be relying just on the scanner to do that. But keep in mind, I take a picture of everything. If they bring out their discharge papers, I take a picture of that. All the photos that they have of them. It could be a wedding photo of them in uniform. Those are just really precious. Or one guy, he was digging a foxhole. That was a cool picture. So I scan everything. The permission form, Allison talked about that. I bring that along because if the veterans' children are not present, and we'll talk about that, or maybe they're not even aware that I'm going to be doing this interview, I want to have that just in case the veteran would pass away and they would say, well, what were you doing? And, was Dad even aware that he was talking to you about this? I just want there to be no question about what was going on there. And if you are in their home, or as I said, I used to be in nursing home rooms, take a water bottle because those rooms are usually very warm. Dress lightly, but take a water bottle because your throat will start drying up. And then take a business card because, again, I want people to know who I am. The actual printing on the card itself will probably be too small for the veteran to read himself, but he can at least keep it near his phone. And if he's talking to his kids, he can say, well, I can't read this card, but if you come over, you can get her name and you can find out who she was. So, and that gives all kinds of information, including my website, which is down there in the corner. That way people can see that I have been doing this for a while and I'm very serious about it. Okay, protocol for the interview. Don't let this list intimidate you. Most of it pertains to the aspect I mentioned of showing respect for the veteran. Arrive on time. Now, you may think that veteran has nothing else to do. I've been shocked at how busy some of them are. Yes, you know, a lot of doctor's appointments, of course, but they have family and friends and they may be doing things. So arrive on time and don't keep them waiting. As soon as you walk in, just assume, especially if it's the men, that you'll need to talk loudly. The women weren't in battle, so World War II, they did not allow women in combat. So they would have not been standing next to these loud guns and so on. But it's not a bad idea to just assume you're going to need to speak loudly. And then if you find out that they don't have any trouble hearing, you can lower your voice. But otherwise, it's just going to create frustration on both sides. So I just start talking loudly whenever I'm around an older person, and then speak distinctly. I have a very different name, so I try to say my name slowly for them so that they can understand it. And a lot of times, people today, including some of my kids, I can't understand them sometimes. They talk so fast. So I just have to say, what did you say? Well, just don't even do that because you're going to waste time and effort. Introduce yourself with a smile. Now, that means trying to make them feel comfortable. And if if they're sitting in their chair and they did not get up to come to the door, that's okay, but lean down and be eye level with them. If they're having to look up all the time, it can really start hurting their neck. So you don't want anything to impede the interview. Ask them to choose a seat. If they did get up to come to the door, ask them to choose where they want to sit and then sit near them, because they may speak softly or they may have an air conditioner or a heater that comes on that makes noise, or there may be somebody outside mowing. There could be just a lot of other noise around, and you want to be able to hear them, and they want to be able to hear you. So again, just to make it easy, explain the purpose of the interview. So this may have been made obvious to them at first, but it can't hurt to go over it with them. It could be a family member. It could be a school project. I was made aware of some school classes at Adams Central several years ago that had their students interview a veteran. Every student taking, it must have been a history class, had to do a very nice interview. And then they took all of those interviews and put them into notebooks. And every veteran who participated got one of those notebooks. This was a lot of work, but boy, was it a great research project for me to look at, because some years had gone past since I had interviewed some of those vets and they had forgotten some things. So I could look at those. Now, I mentioned here too a Veterans History Project website. This is a very good project. I would encourage you, if you can, to get all of your relatives' stories logged into this. And there's the website for you to go to. They even have their own forms there that you can print out. Now, newspaper, I did a column for the Fort Wayne News Sentinel before the Sentinel closed from 2015 through 2018. This ran every other week. It was about World War II veterans from the area. So I would always explain to the veteran that I was going to do that. And then I got a copy to them of that story. And then I suggest using the list of questions that I have provided for you as a guide, but to use them in the order that they are listed, because you want to ease into the interview for several reasons. Like we said, some of these interviews are decades old, and we're kind of warming up their brain. They may not have thought of the war in a long time. So you just want to, it's like a workout. Most of us are doing some kind of workout now. And the instructors will always say, well, let's just warm up before we get into the interview. Same thing going here. So start out by talking to them about their families growing up. In my case, most of the guys would have lived during the Great Depression. Now that sounds horrible, but overall, I would say most of them were pretty happy. They had families, they lived on farms, so they had food. And it's almost like they enjoyed talking about their family at that point. And so from there, then we go into them going into the military. Listen well and look attentive. Don't be on your phone. In fact, if I can say anything here today, please turn your phone on mute, turn it off, put it away, don't get it out. If you're going to be, needing to look at your phone for something, it's probably not a good time to do the interview. You're there because they have agreed to give you their story, and that's a privilege. So you don't want to abuse it by being distracted. Plan to stay until the interview is complete. Usually 1 hour is good. I have had some vets go as long as 2 hours, and it's really kind of funny. They may look fairly weak or maybe even a little sleepy or tired, but by the time we get going and they're talking about something, and for a lot of them, the war was actually a pretty exciting time. They were flying in airplanes that were phenomenal, or traveling to places they never ever thought they would ever be. So they might be able to, keep the interview going. Try to keep them on track. A lot of times they want to get off track and talk about other things. Like I said, they want to talk about growing up. But for the most part, I'll just have to say, well, that's really interesting, but can we get back to talking about your military service? And do it very nicely. Don't be nasty about it. Avoid rabbit trails. And by that, I mean that sometimes the veterans even want to tell you things about their families. And I just shut that down right away. I'm not there to be a sounding board for personal matters. So watch for signs of fatigue. After a while, it just may be where they need to get a drink. A lot of them will have water beside them, but if their cup is empty, offer to go get them one. If they need to take a restroom break or an emotional break, allow them to do that. Emotional breaks are pretty not normal. I haven't seen them with every veteran, but the war, I mean, it can be really tough for them to talk about losing friends. If I've had one guy, he actually teared up and he needed to leave, and I would have offered to get him a Kleenex. He came back with a Kleenex box because he had lost some friends. So that's definitely do that. That's showing respect for them again. Be patient. Sometimes the questions that they are being asked, like I said, they haven't thought about that for a long time. And they're going to feel awkward that they're not able to give you a response right away. Again, just show them that it's not a big deal, because they'll start tensing up, and you don't want that. You want them to just stay relaxed. And what I say is, you know what, that's okay. Let's just go to the next question. And if it comes back to you, we'll just come back to that question. And then ask permission to handle their belongings. If they say, that something, oh, I forgot to get that photo album out of the back room, would you mind getting that? Then that is okay. But I don't assume that it's okay for me to go poking around into other drawers or cabinets or anything unless they have given me permission to do that. I generally refrain from being out of their sight. I just don't want there to be any question about anything there. Okay, now we talked about if you would want to have other people sit in on the interview. Now, this may be a request from the family members because they have never heard Dad give his story before. It may be that they have asked in the past to hear the details and he just didn't want to talk about it. But now that he's finally at the end of his life, he's decided, oh, if I don't say something now, I may never get the chance. And they may want to sit in and do that. Now, this can be generally, I have found it to be very helpful. because they can even help the veteran recall stories. They may have heard a few things or people, or they can be the ones to go into the other rooms or the cabinet drawers to get the mementos. It's possible that they could cause the veteran to clam up. You can't always avoid some of that. So hopefully that won't happen to you. And it's never happened to me. So don't worry about that really. Leave the contact information. Like I said, if you don't have a business card, you don't have to, but leave your name and phone number, um, especially if it's going to be something you're handwriting. You could write that extra big so that the veteran can read it and write clearly. And then this is something that he can refer his relatives to. Respect his living area. This is a really big one. I have a mother who lives in a nursing home, and I completely understand. They are fairly limited on mobility. If they're the older vets, they are going to have everything that they need right beside them in a certain position where they can reach it, they can grab it. If they may not be able to see. I have several friends who are legally blind. And so anything that you move during the interview, I like I said, I used to take a tape recorder, that was a decade ago, and plugged it in. And so then sometimes I had to unplug something and then put that back. So I made sure everything was back. But the most important things are the remote controls for their TV, their phones, and lights, like I just mentioned. Always thank the veteran for his or her service. This is really critical. I want them to know that this is a really important thing to me, and then offer to send a copy of the story to them. Now, I have had people like Paul Young, who is featured here in my books, and I do it a little bit differently when I do the interviews for men who and women who I plan to put into a book. I will send them a copy of the story for them to read through. And if there is anything that needs to be changed, edited, then they have the opportunity to do that. And then they send it back to me. I send them the stamped envelope. And then after the book comes out, I send them a copy of the book. So just something for you to be aware of. It's just a policy I have to give a free copy of the books to everyone who participates. Now here's one of my friends here who is in my book. It's book 2 of my World War II Legacies series. They did it for honor, stories of American World War II veterans. Hugh Wallace was a paratrooper in 1944, and he was part of the 82nd Airborne. They dropped into Holland, and he just had great pictures there. You can see he had things framed. That brown picture over on the side there is a Western Union telegram. And I just love seeing those. And then he has a Purple Heart, if you can see on the the right side. It's actually a very beautiful medal, but that is for being injured in battle. So a lot of my veterans have had Purple Hearts. I should tell you as well that last year would have been the 75th anniversary of his drop into Holland with the 82nd. And a company out of California looked around for people who were still surviving from the 82nd, from this particular fall, 1944, and they took Hugh on this trip along with a few others, not very many, but he went back to Europe. So I have been on a World War II tour of Europe, and I hope his tour was a lot easier than mine because I was exhausted. Even just the jet lag is hard, but he was just thrilled. He told me about it. He showed me pictures of it. So it's pretty exciting when there's people like that will even pay for them to go back to Europe, to these places that meant so much to them. Now, here's some of my books that I've mentioned with some of the veterans pictures that you saw. They are full. There's about 100 stories between these 4 books, and I'm just very proud of them. They are not all stories from Indiana or Northeast Indiana. That's what I started with up in the upper left corner. We fought to win. Those stories are all from Northeast Indiana. Mainly, I never thought of writing any other book other than that one. But people began asking me for those. So the next one was They Did It for Honor, Stories of American World War II Veterans. Those are from the state of Indiana. And then We Gave Our Best is book 3. And that is represented by 6 states because, as you can imagine, it was getting harder for me to find World War II veterans to interview. But there is a veteran from every branch, including Coast Guard. That was different. And then I have a new series starting there called the D-Day series. It's the World War II Insider book series, and D-Day was the first one. I'll be having other books coming out of being at Iwo Jima, and we'll just see from there. But I am working on a couple of other projects as well. And then I have this one. This one came out last fall, and it's called It Was Our War II, Youth in the Shadows of World War II. Now, this does not have any American World War II veterans in it. But as I was interviewing those veterans, I kept hearing stories about people who had been children during the war. And this book is pretty amazing to me because it's represented by 7 European countries. I was just able to find these people, and including the continent of Australia. So that's these 2 families here on the front cover were both living in England during the German blitz of bombs, and the children were part of a program called Operation Pied Piper, and they were sent out of London into the country where the bombs were not falling, but separated from the rest of their families. So very, very sad things, but they survived. And you know what? I think so much of what we're going through today, we're learning the same things of survival as what some of these people did. So it kind of makes me choke up to think, now I know how they felt. And I do want to say thank you to all the veterans and their families who are watching this today, because without you, we would not have our freedoms that we have. We're not in danger here of being bombed. You know, we're still a very strong country, and I believe in our country so much. And we thank you for that, because we wouldn't be here without you.